Ani, Bojo, welcome to our first topic of the course, which is intended to frame for us the concept of reconciliation that we have used as a lens to develop this work. As I stated in the introductory video for the course, the concept of reconciliation is complex. We know that reconciliation means different things to different people. And I want to reveal some of those complexities and then introduce us to some of the decolonizing strategies that make this concept of reconciliation particularly relevant to educators and others wanting to engage in a dialogue about the opportunities that this concept holds for us. Indigenous scholars Tyaki Alford, Jeff Corntassel, Glenn Coulthart, and Leanne Simpson have problematized for us the concept of reconciliation, as have others. It will always be hard to reconcile the promise of a country such as Canada and its democratic commitment to educational, social, and economic opportunity with how it has honored its relationships with Aboriginal people. I find the work of Mohawk scholar Tyaki Alford very influential in helping us think about reconciliation in the context of Canada. He takes up the theme of restitution in mapping out processes of reconciliation. He asserts that restitution is about settlers demonstrating respect for what we share, the land and resources, and making things right by offering Indigenous peoples the dignity and the freedom that they are due to restore the spiritual and economic basis for their autonomy. For Tyaki, this is about restoring connections to the land and self-determination. And any hints that reconciliation is about nation building on the part of governments only reproduces previous assimilationist agendas that work against Indigenous self-determination. Tyaki is taking issue with the current conceptions of reconciliation that are concerned with empathy rhetoric and nation building. While these approaches are attractive, he says, and help us to feel good about ourselves, he acknowledges that it's challenging for us to rethink a difficult past and change the way we do things in this country. Reconciliation, then, is about change and transformation through give and take. What I appreciate about Tyaki's perspective on reconciliation, though, and I think quite relevant to this course, is the belief that we cannot transform colonial societies by working from within what are still colonial institutions, and that we cannot achieve justice and peaceful coexistence without fundamentally transforming these institutions, education included. Adding to the discussion is Anishinaabe scholar Leanne Simpson, who cautions us about reconciliation's focus on residential schools rather than attention to the broader set of relationships that created policies and practices aimed at assimilation. Further, she advises that we cannot assume historical wrongs can simply be righted through the work of the TRC. Our colonial history encompasses much more than residential schooling. Similarly, Cherokee scholar Jeff Corntassel is concerned with state and government applications of reconciliation that seem to focus on acknowledging historical injustices of colonization as something of the past and that is now behind us. Those earlier injustices include disconnecting Indigenous peoples from the land by which they find their livelihood, their identities, and also their education, so that capitalism and the people behind it can benefit. He's saying that reconciliation cannot treat colonization as something of the past, something that we need to move on from or turn the page on. There's much to be learned from these critiques. These positions make clear that Indigenous identity, knowledges, and livelihoods are tied to Indigenous peoples' long-standing inhabitation of a place. As such, reconciliation must also be about the land. And secondly, these perspectives highlight for us that colonialism in its forms and functions is not something of the past. Rather, colonialism is an ongoing process that continues to operate in our institutions, schools included. Among the goals of this course is to help educators understand what these priorities mean as they consider strategies for engaging in reconciliation in the curriculum and teaching of schools. and for others to think about these priorities in their dialogues and actions concerned with reconciliation. There are certainly other significant frameworks that help us think about social relations with Indigenous peoples in this country, including decolonization, which is linked to both reconciliation and self-determination. Decolonization is also a process that might be considered more critical to changing and strengthening Indigenous settler relations. This is because decolonization projects require extensive transformation, whereby we need to dismantle institutional structures, policies, and practices that perpetuate forms of colonialism. Mi'kmaq scholar Marie Batiste refers to this process as deconstruction and reconstruction. We should also consider the work of Maori scholar Linda Smith, who brings to the fore the imperative of decolonization in her book, Decolonizing Methodologies. While the work addresses the research done in universities with, for, and about Indigenous peoples, she engages us in the work of decolonization as a critical response to forms of colonization, past and present, and a commitment to changing structures and institutions in our society, including education. Decolonization, then, is a process for all of us who are serious about centering or recentering Indigenous ways of knowing, being, and doing, and how we plan, deliver, and assess in our work with curriculum and teaching. Helping us think through how we might achieve processes of reconciliation and decolonization are several scholars and educators. I've been drawn to the work of Paulette Reagan, a Euro-Canadian settler, as she refers to herself in her book, Unsettling the Settler Within. In using the term settler, she's acknowledging non-Indigenous folks, whether born and raised in Canada or as recent immigrants to the country, as this recognition in itself is necessary to the process of decolonization. In her book, she takes the reader through a settler pedagogy that begins with examining the histories and the life stories that non-Indigenous people have constructed and hold on to, and how these form part of a history that has had serious consequences for Indigenous people. She then considers how do we actively take part in dismantling the ongoing legacy of this history. Like many others, she does not want to see reconciliation situated in feelings of empathy or understanding. Rather, she embraces reconciliation as practices of peaceful resistance through accepting personal and political responsibility for shifting colonial attitudes and actions that do not serve non-Indigenous folks well in their relationship with Indigenous peoples. It may be challenging for us to accept that we have benefited directly or indirectly from colonial policies and practices. Scholars Eve Tuck and Wang Yang suggest that we may even develop strategies in order to relieve ourselves of feelings of guilt or responsibility without really giving up privilege, power, or land. This they refer to as settler moves to innocence. Working with educators or talking with others learning about settler-Indigenous relations, I often hear such comments as, well, I wasn't responsible for that history, or I wasn't even born then, or I didn't even know that that happened to Indigenous peoples. And we need to move beyond rationalizations that position us as what Lenape scholar Susan Dion calls the perfect stranger. Such justifications lead to essentializing, stereotyping, romanticizing, and deficit thinking about Aboriginal people. These rationalizations are then used to explain our own investments in dominant discourses and preventing possibilities for affecting real change in our teaching. Bringing reconciliation to the classroom underscores the responsibility of all of us in our roles as educators to dismantle the legacies of colonialism that curriculum and teaching can reproduce. As educators, we need to be aware of and responsive to the rich knowledge traditions of Indigenous peoples so that we can improve the quality and relevance of education for Indigenous learners and ensure all students are part of a social justice education. It requires us to carefully examine how our ideas about Indigenous people have been shaped. What ideas do we hold on to? Who benefits from this kind of thinking and who's impacted by this thinking? If educators are to reconcile the crisis in Indigenous education as it relates to Indigenous learners and their families, educators need to ask themselves some critical questions. Reconciliation also requires societal change. While early childhood settings, schools, and post-secondary institutions begin to decolonize and more recently engage in indigenizing processes by integrating Indigenous perspectives, learning processes, and ways of knowing into their curriculum, their program, and services, so too must communities, organizations, businesses, and other social systems pursue actions that advance reconciliation. Miigwech.